Namaskar and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, show on Doordarshan, India's national television channel about India's foreign policy, India's international relations, and major changes in India and changes in the world and how these two are interrelated. Viewers, in this episode, we are taking a close look at an important new book. It's called The Indian Reality. This title is authored by Dr. Ram Madhav, a well-known public intellectual and public figure, and he's a member of the National Executive of India's largest socio-cultural organization, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, and president of an important think tank known as the India Foundation. And we are really privileged to have the author of the book himself joining us to discuss its contents. Dr. Ram Madhav, welcome back to Indian Diplomacy.
Thank you. It's an honor.
Ram Madhav ji, Indian Reality, this is a collection of your essays over the last few years, and it covers a wide panorama of topics. And when I was reading it, I got the sense that there was a larger message that there is an Indian worldview, an Indian outlook, and an Indian conceptualization of the way things are going and of identity and all these things. So I'd like to begin with one of the themes that I saw in the book, and I'd like you to elaborate it for the audiences. You said that Indian ethos and conceptualization of society, nation, state, governance, all these fundamental concepts of public life, you said that they are distinct and they are quite different and drawn from our traditions compared to the Western notions. So if you could please elaborate on that with one or two examples, it will be helpful, because often you have taken up the challenge with the westernized understandings of society and polity and nation and governance and all these things. So how does the Indian notions of all these vary, and how influential are these not only for our own domestic governance but for the world?
No, firstly, everybody today acknowledges one fact, that India is rising. Both in India and globally, there is a great acknowledgement and also appreciation about the fact that India is rising today. But this rise is not just like any country rising in terms of its economy, its trade, etc. India's rise has been a very distinct rise. Distinct in the sense that India is presenting a different kind of identity before the world today than what India used to be looked at in the past. For example, India is today is a very ambitious and assertive nation. We are not a very docile, slow-moving type of nation anymore. We show our ambition to grow. Of course, when I say ambition, we are also showing this rise to be a very responsible rise. We are ambitious but also responsible. Secondly, we are rising as a very distinct nation with a distinct identity, as a very culturally, civilizationally rich nation. That is what the world is experiencing. I give you one very interesting example. Today, when any visitor comes to India, any foreign dignitary comes to India, he goes, Prime Minister of, Australia came or Canada came. They went to Swami Narayan Mandir in Delhi. Prime Minister Abe came in 2017. He went to Varanasi and participated in the Ganga Aarti. Now one may ask, how is it relevant? India is not only showcasing its economic muscle, economic power, or the power of rising economy, big market and all, but also it is trying to showcase its great cultural and civilizational value system. That's why I'm saying today's India, when it is rising, the world sees not just the rise of India of the last 75 years, 7 decades, but a slightly different India, which wants to showcase its own distinct cultural, civilizational identity in politics, but also in social, cultural, religious life. That distinction is what I tried to capture in some of the chapters in this book. Our rise should be not just a photocopy of a Western or European nation, but India should rise as its own with its own real identity, which we call it Bharat.
Absolutely. And Ramadhavji, talking of our own identity, I saw in the book you made a very interesting distinction between civic nationalism and socio-cultural nationalism, one of the essays. And you're saying that basically the Indian nationalism is essentially a civilizational cultural one, and it cannot be measured simply by land and people and race or religion and these sort of categories, but it is something deeper. It has to do with the soul and with the spirit. You've mentioned Hegel, but also Deen Dayal Upadhyay, and you've made a larger point that our nationalism, which is very close to this notion of rise of India, is also quite distinct from the nationalism that we are seeing in other parts of the world. So could you tell our audiences what is it about Indian nationalism, especially in the current juncture, which sets it apart?
The critics of the current transformation that one sees in India highlight one aspect. They say that countries should be wedded to what they call as civic nationalism. In other words, constitutionally defined meaning or essence of nationalism. Fair enough, there is no objection to it. But countries like Bharat, which have thousands of years of its history, they have survived, they have lived, grown as a nation for thousands of years, must be having something more to it than the constitution. The constitution came into existence in 1950, we have full respect to it, and we are committed to be abiding by that constitution. In that sense, constitutional nationalism you call it, constitutional patriotism you call it. That is the fundamental duty of every citizen. But the point that one needs to understand about Bharat is, Bharat is a nation not from 1950. It has been a nation for millennia. What is that spirit which has kept it as a nation? All those invaders who came to India did not conquer parts of India. They did not come to conquer Uttar Pradesh. They came to conquer India. Bharat. They wrote, the Mughal records wrote, Hindustan is what they are trying to conquer. The Britishers came and tried to conquer the entire country. That nation which existed prior to 1947, did it have a spirit or not? That spirit is what we call as civilizational nationalism. It's not against cultural civic nationalism. Civic nationalism or civic patriotism is confined to constitutional spirit that everybody has to follow, no doubt. But India has the rich tradition through which people of this country imbibe the spirit of nationalism. That nationalism tells you that heroes of this country, thousands of years of its history, they all should be respected. Ram should be respected. Krishna should be respected. Saints, sages like Aravindo, Vivekananda, Dayananda should be respected. Heroes like Shivaji, Rana Pratap should be respected. That nationalism is what is the real nationalism of this country. Every person in this country, 1.4 billion people of this country, are fired by that patriotism, that nationalism, which is very civilizational, very historical, very cultural. So I tried to make that distinction, that remember, for India, the very unique distinction is this nationalism is thousands of years old.
And it's sui generis, no doubt, because there are only very few civilizational states like ours. Ramadhavji, there's another concept in the book where you have taken on the Western liberals. You have talked about them and their notions of all these concepts we are discussing, like society and state and nationalism and all this. And you say that their concept is based on conflict between humans and nature, between citizen and the state, between the society and the rulers. And on the other hand, you have shown that in our traditions, going back to the Vedic times and to the epics, Mahabharata and Ramayana, you've shown that actually they are much more harmonious and syncretized than the Western notions, which are based on division and conflict. And I think that's a very fundamental intellectual point you've made in the book. And would you like to talk about what you think is that essence? And you've tied it to the notion of the Rama Rajya or the Dharma Rajya, which is a well-governed state. and you have shown that it is not based on the whims or the diktats of the rulers, and we have never had that kind of tradition, but rather one where the well-being of the people. You have used the phrase yoga kshema, from our history, and that seems to be a different notion, and that way India is also a distinct model for governance you are showing. So please tell us a little more about this.
Liberalism and its adversary in the West, namely conservatism, these two are very European ideas. Classical conservatives and classical liberals had certain very fundamental issues. There was a church control in Europe until the 15th century. There was a movement for reformation in 16th and 17th century, which led to Enlightenment era, which gave rise to what is called liberalism today. That classical liberalism and classical conservatism as concepts, as ideas, are very European. Honestly, for people in India, we neither have any big challenge or big trouble with conservatism, nor even with liberalism. When I say classical liberalism of Europe. But today what happened in the last few decades was, this liberal movement has been hijacked by the left and extreme left groups. These left and extreme left groups, inspired by Karl Marx ideas of communism, are bent upon destroying everything that human society has evolved, developed over millennia of its experience. They want to destroy your family. They want to destroy your social institutions. They want to destroy religion. They want to destroy state, that is government. They essentially say, in the name of freedom of the individual, now even from freedom of individual, they went to the extent of freedom of everything, freedom of an animal, freedom of anything. Everything pitted against institutionalized life of the humans. That is where the real challenge is. What liberalism today is, it's actually a camouflage for these anarchist movements, which sometimes are also called woke. We in India probably find some issues in classical liberalism to be, of course, very acceptable to us. Classical liberalism's love for nature is something we love. We as Hindus, or Indian society, Bharatiya society, has always regarded nature as very sacrosanct, very sacred. So that is a very liberal idea in the West. Conservatives never cared for nature, they only cared for profit. So some ideas of conservatives we may not like, some of liberals we may not like, but what today liberals are representing is anti-human, anti-state, anti-institutional life of these societies. They want to destroy them. That is where I said countries like India have to be very careful. You cannot simply think that, okay, you are pro-religion, so you are conservative. I want to be anti-religion, so I want to be liberal. No, liberalism will come and it will actually destroy very fundamental, very core convictions, commitments of our society. Thousands of years, we are a very religious society. Vivekananda called Bharat as Dharma Prana Bharata. Soul of this country is religion. You can't remove it. He says at one place very interestingly, he says, if you want to teach mathematics to a child, teach it through religion. He will understand easily. You tell a boy what is 5. You tell him 5 means 5 Pandavas. He will remember it. He knows 5 Pandavas well, so he knows what is 5. So teach religion through mathematics through religion. That is Bharat. Don't try to imitate these very fanciful Western liberal, categorized as liberal, but actually extreme left ideas. That is the distinction I sought to make in that.
And you are saying they are actually alien to our soil and our traditions, and I think that's one of the reasons why these are still fringe ideas in India, but some intellectual circles you hear that.
But not only, they are not only a challenge to India. Of course, to us it's a challenge. We are a very traditional society, we can't accept those ideas. But even for a very advanced modern countries like America, there is a lot of churning going on, a lot of rethinking going on. Even the classical liberals, who are, for example, the Democrats in US, they are very, very much perturbed by the extreme liberal views within their own, fraternity. These extreme liberals. So because they are basically very destructionist. Do you know that they today say that you cannot ask a child his gender until he turns 16. He should decide, he or she should decide his or her gender on his own.
Yeah, there's a lot of this.
That's a very crazy idea. But that is how many schools are in Europe and West.
And there's a
today.
backlash against it also.
From the liberals also.
Yeah, Ram Madhavji, another important thing I want to point out to viewers about this book, Indian Reality, is discourses on democracy and the state of democracy around the world. Ram Madhavji, you've written about democracy being in crisis, and especially in last 15-20 years, a lot of these countries are regressing or becoming more authoritarian and all that around the world. But in India, the faith and the participation and the stakeholdership in democracy is continuing to grow and grow and grow, and contrary to all these biased Western narratives about India, and you have challenged those things in the book. And we have the 18th general election happening in India, and 1 billion people are going to be in the electorate, and it's just a stunning thing. It's like a festival of democracy, as our leaders are saying. And in that context, I'd like you to share a few thoughts on what is it about India that our democratic values, and you have shown in the book that they go back to the Vedic and Upanishadic periods and to the republics, early republics, and you have traced it all the way to contemporary times. So why is our democracy has such a long lineage, and where people have so much faith, or what in Hindi we call astha, in the democratic process? I think nowhere in the world, even these liberals are all crying about democracy being in threat, but in India it's flourishing, isn't it? So how is that happening?
Absolutely. Remember, these days the so-called Western press, Western media tries to pass judgments on our democratic system. They say that there is a democratic deficit in India, etc., etc. May tell these people, I mean, I highlighted that aspect in one of the chapters in this book, one of the essays in this book, that India is the world's largest democracy that everybody knows. As you rightly said, 1 billion people voting in 1.1 million polling stations is mind-boggling for the world. But I also added in that book that we are the most successful democracy. Where democracies struggle in a number of countries, we presented a very successful model where the mature electorate changes governments at the drop of the hat. No party can take elections for granted. Yeah. You see, let me compare. Mr. Putin passed through an election. Did he campaign? Did he go to the electorate?
It was a foregone conclusion.
No, but there was an election and he won. Mr. Xi Jinping, I mean, I am citing these cases because they are very big leaders in the world today. Mr. Xi Jinping in 2022 simply amended the constitution, got elected for the 3rd time. And the kind of tamasha that is happening in US we are seeing about democracy. But look at India. Leaders toil every day, from prime minister to opposition leader to leaders of all parties, go around the country, go to the people, campaign, then they win. And this democracy is shown as a flawed democracy by some Western liberals. My point is, democracy is successful in this country for a very important reason. This reason was highlighted by Ambedkar in the Constituent Assembly in his last speech on 25th November 1949, in which he tells that, you see, we opted for democracy not because we are enamored of the Western models and all. He says democracy is in our blood. He cites the example of the Buddhist Sanghas. How Buddhist Sanghas used to have an electoral system by which they used to be elected, there used to be a parliament-like setup where arguments would happen. He said it has been there right from the time of Buddhist Sanghas. Deen Dayal Upadhyaya, a very renowned ideologue, went one step further and said, not just Buddhist Sanghas, even before that, the Vedic Sabhas and Samitis also used to have a democratic model where you have a system of election. Now, if you read Chanakya, if you watch Chanakya's that serial, you would know that the republics that used to exist on the periphery of our territory, Indian territory, they were all called republics. There used to be a system of 25-30 chieftains coming together, taking decisions by majority. That is the kind of spirit existed in this country. So, democracy has been in the blood of this country. That is the reason why a country of 1.4 billion is able to run its democratic process flawlessly, transparently, and very successfully. That is the beauty of Indian democracy.
So the continuity of our civilization is linked to the success of our democracy, and that's an important point. Ramadhavji, moving to the foreign policy and international aspects that you have covered in Indian reality, I was struck by your focus on China, which has of course become a major adversary for us in recent years. And you've already mentioned the Xi Jinping model of authoritarianism, and you have talked about how we have responded to the Chinese expansionism and aggression and all these things, and you've also put it in the larger context of the global trend that you're talking about, which is what many people call the new Cold War. So in that context, the way we have positioned ourselves to continue to enable our own rise while not becoming subservient to any Chinese or a Sino-centric Asia and all these things. You've written a previous book also about China-India relationship and the conflicts between our two countries in modern times. So do you think we have done enough going forward to be able to manage this China problem? I mean, this is for the world audiences especially who are watching the show, they all want to know, is India prepared and sufficiently ready and has the strategic acumen to handle the China problem? Because that seems like one of the big external threats for our democracy and for our continued rise.
70 years ago, when we were a newly independent nation, we had a very romantic idea about relationship with our neighbors. We thought that all neighbors are the same, so we should have Hindi Chini bhai bhai type relationship. 1962 war taught us a big lesson that all neighbors are the same, and especially countries like China are very different. China is not just like any other neighbor. It's a civilization. It has a very civilizational type of memory. It has a particular behavior. For us to understand, we had to face one bad war and lose badly in 1962. From there to today, our understanding about this difficult neighbor has definitely improved tremendously. At least today, we know very well that, of course, it is our neighbor. We made the mistake of making it our neighbor by allowing Tibet to be swallowed by it in 1950s through that long occupation. But once it is a neighbor, you have to learn to live with it, and you have to learn the way how to live with it. I think we have learned it. We see it in a very two different ways. One is the neighbor. As a neighborhood conflict, you deal with it. That is there also we have now made a major shift in our approach. We are no longer dealing with this neighbor through diplomatic channels. On the ground also we are standing up very firmly. We stood up very firmly with our military force at Doklam when it tried to change the borders there. Tri-junction between Bhutan, India and China. In Ladakh, it tried to trespass into our territory. We moved our army, our 50,000 soldiers, and today stood eyeball to eyeball for last 4 years. So on the ground we are standing firm and dealing through diplomatic channels to resolve the issue. That's one major shift we have made in our strategy while dealing with bilateral tussle, bilateral conflict. That will remain. But China is not just a bilateral challenge. China is a global challenge. There, to deal with its global challenge, its efforts to undo the world order of the day and impose its own world order on the world, especially on the gullible countries, we are today joining hands with all those democracies in the world, or all those good powers, whether it is Western powers or ASEAN or other countries like Japan, Australia. We are all coming together to tackle this challenge of the authoritarian world order sought to be imposed by China and its leadership. When I say this, we don't have anything against people of China, but the current leadership of China, which has a different kind of vision for its future. So that way, our understanding about China is much different from what it used to be 50 years, 70 years ago.
Yeah, the combination of deterrence and also strategic partnerships is, I think, the key. Ramadhavji, last word. You've talked about the concept of heteropolar world in this book, and the non-state actors, especially big tech, and how they have become a major force for good but also for disruption and for chaos. And in that context, is India prepared for this heteropolar or further heteropolarization of the world that may be happening due to technological changes? There are a lot of elements that want to. You've talked about the tukde and all these elements. So for them, they are using these transnational connections, using technology, using social media to try and break the unity, the fundamental unity of India. You've spoken about that throughout this book. Are we prepared to deal with this challenge well enough, and what more do we need to do? You spoke about regulation and need for technology regulation, but what more do we need to do to maintain our stability and our progress and our rise in spite of these heteropolar challenges?
So the 21st century used to be called as a multipolar century by experts. But over the last 5 to 10 years, there is this new realization: it's just not multipolar, it's actually heteropolar. By heteropolar, what we mean is non-state players also becoming significant factors in deciding about the rise or future of nations. For example, big tech companies. You talked about artificial intelligence. It is driven by companies. Today, an Elon Musk or a Jeff Bezos is in a position to do or undo the rise of a country. Not a country of India's size. Okay, India, they won't do anything, but smaller countries. Today, Red Sea is all a big challenge to entire world's navies because of one terrorist organization called Houthis. So terrorists, religious leaders, NGOs, Rockefeller Foundation, or guys like him, they are becoming a challenge. So this heteropolar challenge is what countries have to understand. I'm sure India understands it. Technology is becoming a big challenge, especially the rise of artificial intelligence, the allied activity, and genetic engineering side, the kind of new challenges that are coming up. These require urgent attention of the nations. Countries have to understand that it's not just about dealing with other countries. You have to deal with these kind of non-state players. In that, yes, India is also preparing. Many countries are preparing, not easy, but India is also trying to tackle this. India is also trying to come up with certain regulations. Regulations are important, but also equally important is a sort of a philosophical outlook. How far should we allow technologies to go, where to put a stop? Unfortunately, the whole world is unfortunately lagging behind. No much thinking is happening. How to regulate, we are thinking, but how to actually prevent it from happening?
Yeah.
Once it happens, then you want to regulate it. How to prevent it, where to stop it, is where you need philosophers to step in.
Ethical and moral.
That's not happening.
India as a Vishwaguru should be able to lead
India
on these
can
fronts.
definitely contribute.
I want to thank Ram Madhav ji for sharing valuable insights on this new book, The Indian Reality, from Rupa Publications. Viewers, do look up this book. And Ram Madhav ji, thank you always for leading from the intellectual side and for giving us food for thought and for guiding the younger generation also, because they look up to you very much. Thank you so much, and I promise you that after the show, more people are going to be reading Indian Reality and will be writing to you.
Thank you for talking about my book.
So viewers, Indian Reality is out in your nearest book stands and on online portals. Do get your copies and read it and think about all the diverse issues we have discussed today in the show. Thank you for watching. I'll see you again next time. Until then, take care.